Hey everyone, in this part we are going to talk about the toggle button. So, as the name suggests, toggle button allows us to toggle between two or more states. Okay, and based on each state you can perform an action. I like to think of a toggle button as an ignition key where you turn the engine on and off, but it's a little more than that. And actually it's like a combination of a checkbox and a regular button. So having said that, let me just show you what I have so far. Basically a grid with two columns. In the left column we have a bunch of text blocks that's I'm going to use as a guide. It's just the flow of the tutorial. Okay, so we'll be talking about events first, then properties, and then we'll get into customization. Okay, having said that, in the right column I have just a stack panel with nothing inside yet. So we're going to create our first toggle button inside the stack panel. Let's go ahead and add our stack toggle button. I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to call this btn toggle 1, and I'm going to give it a height of 40, whoopsie, and width of 120. Okay, then I'd like to give it a content of my toggle button. Okay, alright, so we have our first toggle button right here. Let's run this. Alright, it's by appearance it looks like a regular button, but when you press or click you'll see the difference. I'm just telling this for some people that may not know what toggle button is, so if you know already you don't have to worry about that part. So let's go ahead and click this button and you'll see the color changes. That's because the button stays pressed in, unlike a regular button where button pops back out. A toggle button stays pressed until you press it again. So this is like an on off switch. Okay, you press again, it unpresses. I mean it goes back to normal state. Alright, so it's like again in terms of an ignition key, you turn the engine on and then turn it off. Okay, so that's a toggle button, but appearance wise it looks like it's a generic look, so you can tell whether it's a toggle button or regular button, but when you click it you'll know it. Alright, so we're going to start with events. So the first event we are going to look, actually you know what, let me go to properties real quick. I mean toggle button has ton of events, just like a button and then some. Compared to a button you have the checked and unchecked events that we are going to cover, and again these are the most common ones, so I'm going to cover those, but if you have any questions please drop in the comment section. I can answer questions in Q&A sessions. Alright, so the checked event, let's create a checked event. We can either do from here, from the XAML, or we can actually let me do the first one from the properties pane. So if I go back here to properties with the events tab selected, I can double click here and then it's going to create the event handler for me. Okay, so with this one what I want to do is I want to change the color of this checked event text block. Okay, so the name of the text block is T1. So basically I want to say T1 dot foreground and change the color to a new solid color brush, colors that red. Okay, so if I run this, and click the button, it'll change the color to, it fires the event and change the colors of the text block to red. Okay, if I uncheck it, nothing happens because we haven't used the event yet. Okay, so the next event is unchecked event. So unchecked. Let's create a new event handler, and let's go to definition. So here we can do a similar thing with the T2. The second one is, I believe it's called T2. So T2.foreground, change the color to red. Okay. So if I press first time, it's going to fire this event, the checked event. If I press again, it's going to fire the unchecked event. Okay. So that's that. Now the click event. Alright, let's create a new event header for the click event, and let's go to definition. Okay, what we can do the same to make sure with the click event, and that's going to be T3. So you want to change the color for T3 to red. But you'll see something else going on here. So let's press again, and you'll see it fired two events. So it fired the checked event and it fired the click event. Okay. So if I press one more time, it's going to fire the unchecked event, and plus it's going to, so every time you press the button or click the button, it's definitely going to fire the click event. Okay, but the checked or unchecked will be based on the current state of the button. All right, so the priority is checked or unchecked, and the click comes last. So it fires one of these first, depending on the state, current state, and then the click event gets fired. Just to prove you that, we can actually, instead of this, we can say display a message box. And that's fine because there's test. So it's going to display test when we let me comment this out. The message box should display test when this click event fires, right? So let's run this again. Let's click the button. So it fired the click event after it fired the checked event. How do we know that? Because this is a dialog box. If this event was the first one, it wouldn't go through to fire the checked event because this is a dialog box. It blocks it. But since this one fired first, the color changed. Okay, that's how we know this was the first event that fired, and then the click event fired. Okay, if I uncheck it, it's going to fire the unchecked event first and then the click event. All right, let's change this back to what it was before. Okay, so let's move on to properties. So we got, actually, you know what, before we go to the properties, I want to change this to, you know what, I'll come back to this later. So properties. Okay, For properties, I'm gonna create another toggle button, and let's give it a name. Let's say btn toggle 2, and let's also have a same height and width. And then I'm not gonna give it a content here. I'm gonna give the content inside the XAML with the triggers. So with this one, I want to use a style. So ToggleButton.style, and this style is going to have a style tag, and target type is going to be a toggle button. And I want to have some triggers in here. Now, actually, before triggers, I want a setter. So the first setter, I want to give the content here. So property content. Let's say this is an on-off switch, right? So we want the value to be by default off. Okay. And let's increase the font size to something larger. Let's go with 24. Okay, that's pretty good. And then I want to have triggers. So style.triggers. So the trigger, the first trigger I want to use is for the checked event. I mean checked IsChecked property. So is trigger, okay, property is checked. So when the property is checked is true, what do we want to happen? I want to change the text to on. So I'm going to take this, copy and paste this. So instead of off, I want the content to say on. Font size can stay the same. I think that's it. So let's run this and see what happens. So if we did it right, when I click this button, it should change to off. Okay, and it did. I mean on. Okay, so when we click the button, the IsChecked property, when it's true, it displays on, and if you click again, it switches back to off. Okay, so that's your IsChecked when it's true and when it's false. Okay, so that's IsChecked property. Alright, next up we have the IsPressed property. That's an interesting property because you're not gonna see it in here. If you go to, let's select the button. If you go to properties pane and you search for IsPressed, you can't find anything. Right, but if you say IsChecked, there it is. Okay, so let's add another trigger, actually inside the triggers tag, and this time we're going to use the property IsPressed. And when the value is true, I want the font size to go down to 12. So I'm going to copy this line here, paste inside here, and change this value to 12. Okay, let's run this and see what happens. Alright, so let's click the button. Did you notice that? So the font decreases to 12 and pops right back up to original 24. Okay, so on, off. Alright, so that's IsPressed property. Okay. Alright, next up we have IsThreeState. So this one, first I want to go back to our first button and set the IsThreeState true. I mean ThreeState. Why do I keep saying TriState? So let's change this to true. Okay, and let's run this. So that's the first button. So it's checked, checked fired, click fired, unchecked. Well, actually unchecked didn't fire, because right now we have 3 positions. Remember the analogy of ignition key? So right now the ignition key is halfway between engine on or engine off. Okay, so you have the dashboard, electronics working inside the car, but the engine is not turned on. So that's like your TriState button, toggle button, and the value is actually null. So right now we have checked, true, false, and null. Okay, so if I press one more time, it will uncheck. The unchecked event will fire, and click event will fire as well. Okay, so let's let me go to code behind and go inside the toggle button. I mean click event. You know what? I'm gonna actually comment this out real quick. So these 2 events don't fire, and instead I'm gonna go inside the click event and say if btn toggle1 dot is checked equals true. In that case, I'm gonna copy this part here. Maybe we should use background this time, just to be a little different. Okay, and then else if, we could use a switch statement too if you wanted to. Else if btn toggle dot is checked equals null. Now we have the null value. That's because we set the IsThreeState to true. Okay, so when this condition is true, we want the background to be something else. Let's say I don't know, light gray maybe. And then else, well, we have only one more left, but you know what, let's just say else if btn toggle dot is checked equals false. In that case, let's say why do I always use T1? I'm gonna change those. Let's say background this time to be something like blue. Okay, actually let me change these to, that T1 can stay there. Is checked is the T1. This can be T2 and this can be T. Now T3 now. Oh, well, let's do T3. That's fine. Alright, let's run this, see what happens. Got errors. We got errors somewhere here. Line 30, 31 does not contain definition for double unchecked. Oh, because we right, because we commented these two. Oh, that's why. You know what? Let's uncomment again. That can stay there since we are using background anyway. So let's run this again. Okay, so let's click. All right, the first one fired and the click event fired. So right now it's checked. Let's click again. So the null event, actually the state is right now null, but it didn't check the unchecked because we didn't get there yet, of course. So if I click one more time, it unchecked should fire. Okay, so unchecked fire and click event fired. Okay, so that's that. So we got, or we can say engine on, engine off, engine idle, something to that effect, but you get the idea. Okay, so we got three states. We got checked, unchecked, and null. Okay, so that's that. We can do the same thing down below here too with the XAML part of it with the second button. In that case, let's see. We can set the IsChecked property to true. I mean, you can play with this. I'm just going to show you. You can set to false, or you can set to null. So based on each value, you can perform an action. Okay. I'm going to change this back to true. So you got the idea. All right. I think that's it for this part. In the next part, we're going to continue with some customization and make our toggle buttons visually more desirable. Okay, until then, I'll see ya.